طيب let's recall what we discussed last lecture. In previous lecture, we have discussed the what's humanitarian logistics, and one main thing that we have discussed is the differences between humanitarian logistics and and business logistics or commercial logistics, as it was said in the slides. That, as we have seen that one of the main differences is in humanitarian logistics, the objective is to elevate suffering from people, to minimize the loss of life. While in commercial, the main target is to increase profitability or to satisfy the customer. This is translated into the performance measures. It will be in humanitarian logistics or relief supply chain, how many lives we have saved, how many people are being served with aid, or the response time after how many hours that we are operating on the field. While in commercial logistics or commercial supply chain, we'll find totally different KPIs, like, for example, rate on investment, ROI, rate on assets, profit, revenues, customer satisfaction, so supply chain surplus. So this is the difference. The other thing that we are going to be interested in, start to be interested at this lecture, is the nature of the demand. The nature of demand in humanitarian is sudden demand, cannot be predictable or very difficult to predict. The problem of the demand that we don't know the timing of the demand, the quantity, the size, the location, or the type, what is needed. So we are trying to solve some of these items in this lecture. Let us see what we want to say in this lecture. Here is another definition about humanitarian logistics based on what we have studied till now. We can develop the definition more and more. So it is here the humanitarian, they consider the humanitarian logistics is the processing system involved in, it's the processing system, sorry. Process and system involved in here we are discussing that there is a process called humanitarian logistics. In mobilizing one, let us count what we are going to mobilize. One is people. A part of humanitarian logistics is to mobilize people. What we mean by mobilize people is to transfer people to the location of the disaster. We must move people to the location of the disaster. As we have said previously in the previous lecture, if we have an earthquake, you are going to have, for example, bone surgeons, some of the people who are capable of building roads and building houses and something like that. But if you are having a flood, you will have another type of physicians, doctors, another type of engineers you need. In floods, you need to build some bridge, yes, but it's rare. But you need some, what we called it, a hydraulic engineers to help the water goes away and something like that. So there is certain knowledge you are going to need in each disaster. So, and the knowledge are in at the end, and any knowledge is in the brain of people. So you must transfer this knowledge. So you are going to transfer people to give you the needed knowledge for each one. That's why at the end he said, I want to transfer knowledge. Number 4 is to transfer knowledge and skill. All these 3 means that primarily you are going to transfer people. Sometimes you are getting a remote knowledge. You don't need to transfer the people themselves, but you transfer the knowledge itself. I'm مثلا sitting in my office and they ask me, we have a volcano, blah, 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 blah. We need to know how to do this. And I'll send them how they are going to do this. This is a transfer of knowledge also. تمام? Then they put in this, let us mark it with another, resources. The resources here implies that they mean equipment, material, let's be more specific, raw material, goods, finished goods, and anything else, any material thing. So you are primary, transfer people that will help elevate or rescue some of the beneficiaries. These people should possess a certain set of knowledge and skill. Sometimes you transfer the knowledge and skill remotely by asking people outside the field and they give you a reply. And you must transfer some resources, which are equipment, raw material, finished goods, supplies, whatever the type of these of these resources. Why you are transferring or mobilizing? The word mobilizing means to transfer and to store, both of them. It implies both of them. One of the old definition of the logistics used this word, said that business logistics is to mobilize goods to mobilize goods from consumption to from origin to consumption. And it was a very simple definition, but it was used in one of the definitions of business logistics. Why we are moving these goods and people? Why? To help vulnerable people affected by a disaster. Actually, this is one of the first definitions. Wassenhoff made one of the older definitions, but this is one of the definitions that relates between humanitarian logistics and disaster. This one of the definition, or one of the first definition that said, in order to have a humanitarian logistics, we need to respond to a disaster. That's why it's a very important definition for us. It opened for us that we can, if we understood this disaster, we may understood the nature of the demand, which was one of the most difficult issues in humanitarian logistics, what the demand looked like. So this definition is very important for us because it relates between the humanitarian logistics and disaster. Any questions? Here we have two definitions about disaster. What is disaster? The first definition is the United Nations Department of Humanitarian Affairs. The second is WHO, World Health Organization. I think all of you know this now. Both of them are organization related to the United Nations, الأمم المتحدة، منظمات من منظمات الأمم المتحدة الاثنين. الأولاني ده Department الشؤون الإنسانية في الأمم المتحدة. The Department of Humanitarian Affairs is concerned with any humanitarian issues all over the world. To alleviate suffering, to improve the welfare of the life of people, to concern of human welfare, all what we have discussed previously about the definition of humanitarian. They are concerned with, not only disasters. The WHO, all of us know now, it's concerned with the health of the people. Both of them not directly involved in responding to disaster, but one of the issues they are dealing with is how to respond to disaster. So they define disaster. They put a definition of disaster. Let us see the first definition. Disaster is a serious disruption of functioning society, causing widespread human and material or both of the three environmental losses that exceeds the ability of the affected society to cope using only its own resources. What does that mean? First, the word disruption. The word disruption means something went abnormal. Something abnormal happened. It's not a regular thing to happen. There is a high abnormality of the event. So a serious disruption means it's a very big abnormal event occurred. This event caused widespread of human, material, or environmental losses. So we have a society, some event happened to this society, a lot of people died or injured, a lot of material resources. Material resources, we mean by material resources, anything material, buildings, roads, schools, or whatever. Losses happen to this material resources, or environmental pollution, very high level of pollution. For example, an oil spill occurred, or smog in the city, or something like that. So this disruption occurred, but they put a certain condition for this disruption to be considered a disaster. Not any disruption for the society is considered a disaster. What is this condition? That the disruption or the losses caused by the disruption exceeds, let's put it in another color, exceeds the ability of the affected society to cope using its own resources. This is the key of defining a disaster. Is it the disruption? Is a disaster or not? If the affected society cannot deal with the disruption, then it is a disaster. But if it can deal with it, then it's not a disaster. Let us try to clarify this a little bit more. For example, if an earthquake with an intensity 6.5 on Richter scale, of course, occurred in Japan, then The affected society is the Japanese society. When this disruption occurs, life will go as normal. They will not face human or material or environmental resource losses in the first place. The functioning society will continue functioning as normal. But then the event is a Richter scale 6.5. It's an earthquake, sorry, with a magnitude of 6.5 Richter. When occurred, this is a disruption, but the disruption didn't affect the society. This is an event. Maybe it will not be classified as a disruption. Fine. Let us consider now that the same magnitude of an earthquake occur in Los Angeles in the United States. You may face widespread losses of human and material. You will face a lot of houses will maybe be destructed. Maybe not that much people will be lost, but at least the houses and the roads will be highly affected. But the local community, what we mean by the local community, who are the people who are affected by these earthquakes, are the inhabitants of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. So the local community of the city of Los Angeles, the departments, various departments of the city of Los Angeles, will be able to deal with this disruption. They will not need outside help, either from other cities in California or other cities in other states in the United States or the federal government. يعني انتوا عارفين النظام في امريكا في الولايات، فالولايات ممكن تساعد بعض، وفي الحكومه الفيدراليه اللي هي في واشنطن ممكن تساعد الولايات. This is not a disaster. It's a serious disruption for the functioning society, caused widespread of human and material and environmental resources, losses, but the local community or the affected society was able to cope with it with its own resources. So nothing happened. There's no problem. This is not a disaster. If the affected society by the disaster or by this disruption is able to cope with it, to deal with it without asking any help from outside the society, then this is not a disaster. When it will be a disaster, for example, if an earthquake 6.5 Richter occurred in لا قدر الله مثلا in any of the Egyptian cities, this will be a huge disaster. Why? The local community will not be able to deal with it. You heard about, I think you are not born yet, but you heard about the 1991 or 1992, I think, 1992, yes, earthquake, which happened in Egypt. It was 5.9 on, its magnitude was 5.9 on Richter scale. No local community was able to deal with it. Help came from even outside Egypt, from Algeria, from France, from the United States, from various European countries, because it caused material losses and human losses. No one knows exactly how many people died in this earthquake, but yet it was beyond the capacity of the Egyptian government to deal with it with its own resources. Then it is a disaster. Yep. The question to say this is a disaster or not is, you must ask the following question. Is the local community, if the local community can deal with the event by itself, then it's not a disaster. If it needs outside help, then it's a disaster. طيب. From this definition, we can classify disasters on two levels of disasters. A local disaster and international disaster. What we mean by this? For example, we have some 3 or 4 states in the United States, which are Florida, Louisiana, Texas, some of these states, maybe 2 or 3 more, are subjected to very powerful hurricanes. Sometime when the hurricane affects one of these states, the state with its own resources can face the hurricane. It caused the damages in material, sometimes in human losses, but the states by its own resources can face it. Sometimes it's beyond the capability of the states to face it. So they have to get a help from other states or from the federal government. يعني ساعات الستيتس بتقدر تواجه الموضوع بنفسها. خلاص, this is not a disaster. The local community cope with it. So it's not a disaster. But in other times, in other hurricanes, the damage is beyond the state capability. فالfederal government sends help to the states. This is a local disaster. No help came from outside America. مفيش مساعدات جت لأمريكا من بره. كلها local. On rare occasion, the hurricane is very huge that sometimes help came from outside the United States. This is an international disaster because the aid here have to cross international borders to reach the beneficiaries. يبقى احنا عندنا two levels of disaster. Local disaster, انا جوه البلد هحل المشكله بس هحرك resources من مكان لمكان. زي كده لما حصل سيول في من كام سنه في راس غارب. الدوله حركت resources من القاهره ومن اسكندريه مش عارف ايه تروح راس غارب عشان تلحق الناس اللي هنا. دي لوكال، ما احتاجناش يجي لنا حاجه من بره مصر. لو احتاجنا حاجه يجي لنا من بره مصر دي تبقى انترناشونال ايه ديزاستر. واضح ولا في حد عنده سؤال؟ any questions؟
تمام يا دكتور.
طيب الديفينيشن الثاني بقى قال لك ايه؟ قال لك result disaster result of vast ecological breakdown in the relationship between human and between man and his environment. A series of sudden or slow disruption. اتكلم برضو على disruption on such a scale that striking a community needs extraordinary level to cope with. This definition is very similar in meaning but very different in words. يعني هو ده ال difference. بس they talked about two important things here. Ecological breakdown between man and his environment. This definition views life on Earth as a balance between human beings and the surrounding environment. They called it an ecosystem. This ecosystem is governing the relation between us and the surrounding environment. If anything happened and this ecosystem is naturally balanced, يعني الفيو هنا ان في حاجه كده سموها الايكولوجيكال سيستم، اختصارا بتعرف باسم الايكو سيستم، ان الايكو سيستم ده is balanced. The ecosystem is balanced. What means it's balanced? There are enough resources in nature that satisfy the needs of a human being. and there should be no problem in living because we have a balanced ecosystem. If any disruption happened to this ecosystem, then we are going to face a disruption in the surrounding resources. Then, as it's said here in the definition, the relation between man and his environment is disrupted. There is going to be a breakdown, failure between us and the failure between the relation between us and our surrounding environment. تمام? This failure in the relation between us and the surrounding environment will hit a community. And the community will need extraordinary effort to cope with. يبقى هنا the disaster, the WHO viewed the disaster as breakdown in the relation between us and our surrounding environment. Actually, this happened in any disaster. If we have a flood, for example, there is a breakdown between us and our surrounding environment. The river, مثلا, which is flooded, caused a problem. There is no balance more. We need the river to be at a certain level, but this level of water become much higher. So there is a breakdown in the relationship here. Actually, these two definitions, in this definition, we want to understand from this definition, this word of ecosystem, because ecosystem, we are going to need it in our discussions later. But we are going to adopt this definition for the disaster, which is a serious disruption causing widespread of human, material, or environmental losses beyond the capacity of the affected environment. These losses is beyond the capacity of the affected environment. This is the main definition of disaster that we are going to adopt. Any questions? Yeah. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent، المنظمة الدولية للصليب والهلال الأحمر. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, these two organizations were two separate organizations, but they come together, I think, something 15 or 20 years ago merged together in one organization to synchronize the relief effort they are doing. This was the main thing here. This International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent put 10 categories of disasters. They start to specify what is a disaster. And they said there are 10 types of disasters, 10 categories of disaster. Hurricane, flood, drought, earthquake, volcanic eruption, epidemic, famine, and food insecurity طبعا. Man-made disaster like terrorist attack and war, population movement, and technological disaster. These are the main 10 disasters that can occur on Earth. Are there another types of disaster? Yes, in another classifications, they added some of the other types, but we are going to stick with this 10. يبقى الcategories, or we said it, categories of disaster or the types of disasters. Let us start by hurricanes. What we mean by hurricanes. Basically, we have three names for this disaster: hurricane, cyclone, and typhoon. Hurricanes used usually in Western Pacific, يعني used in the United States, Latin America, مش عارف ايه, Canada, الكلام ده. Cyclone usually used in sorry, hurricane used in Western Atlantic, ان هو امريكا وكندا وامريكا اللاتينيه, وسط امريكا, Caribbean. This used the word hurricane. Cyclone is used in Eastern Pacific, in Western Pacific, يعني in Eastern Africa and this area, while typhoon is used usually in Eastern Pacific, in our Southeast Asia والحتة دي. يعني it's all are talking about the same thing. There are slight differences between them. We are not going to this level of details, but all of them are considered as a huge storm. All of them is storm. What we mean by storm? Wind. Huge wind with a very high velocity. هواء برياح بسرعة عالية جدا. Here they say that it can be up to 600 miles. 600 miles, almost we are talking about 900 kilometers across. What they mean by 600 miles across? If you are going to see this photo, this image here on the left, this is a satellite image about a hurricane. This circle, you see this circle of white clouds, as if they are white clouds. This is the hurricane. This is an image by the satellite of a hurricane. When they say it can be 900 kilometers across, the distance from this can reach, maybe less, can reach up to 900 kilometers. That's what they mean about the across of the hurricane. 900 kilometers, that means as if we had a hurricane, Cairo and Luxor can be affected at the same time by the same hurricane. يعني عشان بس تشوف المسافة، إن المسافة من القاهرة لبعد الأقصر بشوية كمان حوالي 900 كيلو، فكل دول ممكن يكونوا تحت نفس الهوريكين، لأن هو المساحة بتاعته إيه؟ بتبقى very huge. طيب قال لك إيه بقى بعد كده؟ قال لك يبقى a huge storm, it can be up to 600 miles across, having strong winds. The hurricane is mainly about wind. And the wind movement spiraling, we are going to illustrate this طبعا, spiraling inward and upward at speed of من 75 to 200 kilometer per hour. يعني ايه الكلام ده؟ يعني ان هو the hurricane can reach from 100 till 300 kilometer per hour. The wind speed can reach up to 300 kilometers per hour, maybe a little more than 300 kilometers per hour. And sometimes it may reach 600 or 700 kilometers per hour. 600 kilometers per hour. طبعا 300 kilometers, that means it's faster than most of the cars. If it reached 600 or 700 kilometers, this near the aeroplane speed. The aeroplane speed is from 800 to 900. Usually it's from 800 passengers aeroplane طبعا, not military. So it may reach up to this speed. طيب. What they mean by spiraling? The wind this is You see this small, let's use red. You see this small, as if there is a void or a cavity inside the hurricane. This is called the eye of the hurricane. And the wind in the hurricane have three movements. الهواء له ثلاث حركات. Spiraling بيلف كده. And this is the highest speed. This may reach up to 300 and something like that. So it's have a rotational, the wind is rotating around the center. Sometimes they call it, by the way, sometimes they call it the center. It's rotating around the center of the hurricane. The speed, they may reach 300 kilometers per hour. This is a very high speed. So anything, this wind, a huge amount of wind, moving with this very high speed, anything it will face, they may damage, as you see here. This is one of the cities in Louisiana affected by a hurricane. There were buildings here. All the buildings were removed by the hurricane. And this was a very strong hurricane. But the first speed is this rotational speed around the center of the hurricane. The second speed is upward. Yani if this is the land, the hurricane is rotating and going up. The wind is rotating and going in spiral motion upwards towards the sky. So that's why sometimes it may pull some of the trees or something like that from earth and took it with it upwards while it's moving. Yep. We have the first is a rotational speed. The second is a spiral speed upwards, moving upwards. And the third speed is moving forwards. This may be from 15 to 30 kilometers per hour. طبعا, all these speeds are average speeds. They may be higher, they may be lower. But if it's lower than 100 kilometers per hour, اللي هو 75 miles, this is called storm. We're not going to call it a hurricane because it is a weak, very weak storm, so it cannot be classified as a hurricane. Let us see this small video about the different hurricanes.
When it comes to hurricanes, each one's impacts are a little bit different, but the wind speeds that we talk about along the Saffir-Simpson scale, those are very specific, and the damage caused in those categories is kind of predictable. So let me show you. Let's start off with a Category 1 storm. And the damage here, not too bad. A couple of shingles fall off, you can have some palm fronds bending in the wind, but everything basically remains intact. Category 2, that's where you really start to feel it. Look at the windows of the house. They can be hit from debris from the outside and already start breaking in a Category 2. Your trees are significantly bent over in the wind, and the siding of the house itself can break, flapping there in the wind, adding to those eerie noises inside. Category 3. I've heard only a Category 3, but it's not only anything except really bad news. In a Category 3, you can have the door of the house blown in because the winds get so strong. You can have the roof of the house start to flap up and down in the wind because it can lift off those weak points, and a lot of those trees start to fall. Category 4, the damage is even worse. You get most trees falling, most of your windows breaking, most of your shingles fly away, and then Cat 5 is as high as the category scale goes. By Cat 5, no shingles remain anywhere nearby. The holes in the roof get so big that the walls of the house start to fall because they're not attached to anything anymore. There won't be any trees up in the neighborhood. That's just catastrophic damage. But again, that's just from the wind. And there are other impacts from hurricanes, and they all vary through the season. So stick with the Weather Channel to keep you safe when the tropics head towards your neck of the woods.
طيب هو هنا حاول they tried to illustrate these are 5 categories for hurricanes. Of course, we have this very high category 5, and the effect they discussed here is only from the wind. But usually, the hurricanes come with rain. Usually, it comes with rain. So, the wind may cause what we called tidal waves. Tidal waves يعني ايه؟ ان البحر او المحيط الموج يعلى قوي نتيجة الهواء. يعني the waves in the ocean or the sea become very high due to the air, the blowing air with the winds at the hurricane. The rain and the tidal waves may both cause another disaster, or any of them cause another disaster, which is flooding. You will notice that in most of the cases, we do not deal with a single disaster. The disaster will trigger another disaster or 2 disasters with it. This is very common in humanitarian logistics, that there is a main disaster you are responding at, but this disaster caused 2 or 3 or 4 other disasters. Here, the hurricane may cause flood because of rain and because of the tidal waves. So this is, and of course, as you notice, the effect of wind, it can be very destructive to properties, to material, to all this stuff. And the wind is capable of carrying a truck loaded with 2 or containers. يعني لو عربية عليها 2 containers, the wind of the hurricane is capable of carrying them. These are some of the most deadliest hurricanes in the United States only. طبعا the latest deadliest يعني was in 2005, which is caused the death of around 1,200 people. We have this in 2017, Maria, that caused around the death of around 3,000 people. This is in the United States, a country which is used on dealing with hurricanes. طبعا I think Maria that was category 4. Usually the hurricane come from sea. يعني usually الهurricane بيجي من البحر. But when it approach land, its category become weaker. يعني some of the hurricanes or most of the hurricanes inside the ocean will be category 3, 4, or 5. But when they hit land or become near the land, they may decrease to category 1 or maximum 2. Sometimes they hit with its full power, that if it was a very powerful hurricane in the ocean, it may hit the land with category 5. Category 5, as we have seen in this video, is very damaging category. It may cause a lot of damages to the property and in turn to human life. حد عنده سؤال? Any question? The next disaster, because as we have just said, is floods. Flood is an overwater of flow that submerged land that's usually dry, as we see in here. This land is usually dry. Now it's submerged by water. This is by definition is a flood. The European Union have a flood directive. We have some of the guidelines, what is flood and how to deal with flood. طبعا نفس الكلام, flood as a covering by water of land normally covered, not normally covered by water. يعني نفس الكلام اللي فوق. The flood, the hurricane cause damage, mainly damage to material. The hurricane itself, human, if they are kept inside a well-built buildings, they will not be highly affected by the hurricanes. يعني usually يعني in the United States usually they build their homes with wood. So this is highly affected by hurricanes. So that if they have a hurricane watch or a warning from a hurricane, usually people leave their homes and go to school. Yani government open the schools for people to live at the schools for a certain time till the hurricane goes away, because the schools are built from bricks and concrete and all this stuff. Or many people have a basement in their house, so they lock themselves in their basements. So by this also they are kept from the damaging winds. يعني human lives lost in hurricanes usually not that much. طيب الفlood, why the European Union have a directive for flood? Europe has many rivers. Usually these rivers, when the snow in the winter is high, so when the spring comes and the winter melts down and the snow melts down, usually it causes flood. But along the years, they made some of the precaution by having elevating the banks of the river. رفعوا يقعدوا يبنوا كده على جناب الأنهار. They made some of the dams, بنوا سدود. So they are now not having as much floods as they have maybe hundreds of years ago. As we are going to see from this table. You see here, China also suffer a lot from floods because they have this Yellow River and many typhoons. For example, this is a flood in 1931. Estimated death toll from 1 to 4 million people died. 1997, up to 2 millions died. This 1975, 229,000 people died. As we see, the death is huge. Here you'll find in Netherlands, more than 100,000 people died. This was back in 1530, long back in the history. Holy Roman Empire, this is the location of Germany and Poland now. Also, it's very back in history. This is flood caused by a river, and this caused by the North Sea, that the sea came and flooded due to storm. This is very rare now. But as you see, a lot of people may die from this is the worst floods in history. The worst 10 floods in history. A lot of deaths. Then what about people who are affected but not died? People who lived, survived the flood, but at least their homes, their villages, their cities have been totally damaged by these floods. طبعا, it's important thing to focus on the flood. The main problem of floods here, when a flood occurs, يعني there was a video, I may try to get it maybe in the coming years. There is a video in Alexandria, in Egypt, 3 or 4 years ago. The rain was, a lot of rain occurred at Alexandria. So people, so streets started to be flooded. And someone is filming the manhole اللي هو البلاعة اللي في الشارع, the sewage hole in the street, that water is coming out of it. Water is coming out of the sewage hole in the street. Because the water caused by the rain, they went to the rain drainage اللي هو نظام صرف المطر, and the water was more than the capacity of the drainage pipes. يعني المية اللي اتصرفت نتيجة المطر أكتر من سعة المواسير نفسها اللي بتصرف. So water started to come out from the drainage system. The problem here, usually, floods cause fresh water to be mixed with drain water and sewage water. إن مية النظيفة اللي احنا بنشرب منها المفروض بتختلط بمية الصرف. This is very common in flood. Even some of the wells لو ناس شغالة على آبار بتلاقي تيجي مية الصرف تختلط بمية الآبار. أنهار مية الصرف تختلط بمية الأنهار. طبعا afterwards this is naturally clean. يعني this mixed water goes away and then we have the fresh water alone and the drain water alone. So people in floods will stay for some period without fresh water. This is the main demand if we are talking about the types of demand. People are surrounded by water. They need rescue. Sometimes there is a rain. So people is getting wet and this causes the body temperature to goes down. They need blankets. People cannot live in their homes because their homes are flooded. So they need shelter. As you see, they need fresh water, blankets, shelter, medicine for diarrhea and all this stuff. Usually in poor countries when a flood occur, cholera epidemic started to occur because the cholera came if the drinking water is not clean water. طبعا cholera is deadly. يعني. But this is the nature of the flood and the demand caused by the flood. This is what we want to understand about each of the coming disasters. Any questions? I will stop now because I have something to do. We have a PhD discussion and we can continue next week. First, let us, I will call for the attendance first. Mohab Salah. أمنية حمدي.
أي دكتور.
رضوى.
أي دكتور.
زياد.
أيوة يا دكتور. زياد إيه يا دكتور؟
زياد أيمن.
أيوة يا دكتور.
شريف محمد. عائشة.
Yes, doctor.
علاء الدين.
أيوة يا دكتور.
Sorry. عمر منصور.
أيوة يا دكتور.
كريم محمد مجدي.
أيوة يا دكتور.
كريم محمد. مازن.
يا دكتور.
محمد خالد.
يا دكتور.
محمد سراج.
نعم يا دكتور.
محمد عمرو.
موجود يا دكتور.
محمود حافظ.
ايوه يا دكتور.
مصطفى عادل. نادين وليد.
ايوه يا دكتور.
نريمان سعيد.
يا دكتور.
يوسف عز العرب.
أيوة.
في حد ما سمعش اسمه وبيحضر؟
أنا يا دكتور.
هو انت ميعادك دلوقتي ولا انت بتحضر؟
لا انا لسه ما اتعمليش الحجز.
اسمك رقم تسجيلك اسف الاول.
15/10
15/10
66/22.
اسمك؟
المعتز بالله محمد
اوكي معتز.
يا
مين
دكتور
تاني
وانا
يقول؟
كمان يا دكتور. انا
اسم.
كمان عمر طارق صادق.
هو انت عمر معلش، انت بتحضر ميعادك المفروض دلوقتي ولا انت؟
لا 10:30.
10:30. هتحضر دلوقتي على طول ولا هتحضر 10:30 بعد كده؟
مش عارف والله بس.
لا، ما انت قرر. يعني انا المهم عندي ان انت تثبت عشان ما اقعدش ادور على غيابك هنا وهنا.
ماشي، هقول حاجة اللي تشجع بس عشان لسه مشجع.
ايه ده؟
هعرف حاجة اللي تشجع بإذن الله.
طيب اسمك ايه؟
عمر طارق صادق.
عمر طارق سعد. ماشي، رقم تسجيلك؟
17/10.
مم.
4536.
عمر طارق سعد. ماشي يا عمر. حد تاني يا ولاد ما سمعش اسمه؟
دكتور هو حضرتك مش هتقول مواعيد 10:30؟ انا عرفت ان ميعاد 10:30 اتلغى تقريبا، صح؟
ما انا عندي مناقشة دكتوراه دلوقتي فهروح احضر. ف10:30 غالبا الاسبوع الجاي هاخد السكشن محاضرة، او يعني هشوف لهم ميعاد بديل يعني. بس
طب انا
يعني
حضرتها
10:30
دلوقتي يا
حتى
دكتور.
الآن. لا لا لا. انتوا حاضرين من 10:30 دلوقتي؟
انا حضرتها دلوقتي بدل ما
طب
اعرفش بقى،
استنى.
انا
طب
افتكرت
طب
مش
طب
هتتعوض فلازم احضر
طب
دلوقتي،
استنى
فحضرت
استنى.
دلوقتي.
لا، ما انا كنت ناوي على بسيطة بسيطة. استنى معايا دقيقة واحدة بس، خليك معايا
مع
دقيقة
حضرتك.
واحدة. افتح بس الكشف بتاع 10:30. اسمك ايه يا ابني بقى؟
بشوي كمان يا دكتور.
بشوي. ماشي. مين تاني حضر من 10:30؟
أنا يا دكتور.
طيب انا هنده الاسماء بقى. اسراء، احمد، ابراهيم حمدي، احمد ايهاب،
أيوة يا دكتور.
اسامه مصطفى، دعاء، ساندي، عبد الرحمن، عمر مصطفى، محمد اسامه، محمد خالد، مديحه، مهاب عمرو، مهند، يوسف. حد ما سمعش اسمه؟
أنا يا دكتور
اسمك؟
جون غاوي.
جون. انت 10:30 مش كده؟
10:30، بس المرة اللي فاتت الأسبوع اللي فات حضرت يوم التلات 8:30
طب مش مشكلة، بس انت هتحضر
لا
عشرة
بس قصدي
ونص
يعني 10:30 على طول.
رقم تسجيلك؟
17/10.
مم.
4/9.
مم.
7/6.
7/6. اوكي. حد تاني يا ولاد؟ اشوفكم بقى الاسبوع الجاي ان شاء الله. و10:30 تحضروا في ميعادكم عادي. 10:30.
تمام يا دكتور.
تمام.